I'm Sablor Glama and I'm here with the news for the hour. Moving on to the first news. A week into the declaration of a humanitarian truce by the Ethiopian government, Tigray has seen no improvement in access to much-needed humanitarian assistance as more than 6.5 million remain in crisis. Earlier today, we spoke with member of Tigray's Central Command, Getachew Reda, who says his government remains committed to the humanitarian truce despite the Ethiopian government's continued failure to demonstrate goodwill. Let's take a look at that. Getachew Reda, member of Central Command, thank you so much for your time. And let me begin by asking, a statement issued on Thursday by your government said that it would accept a call by the Ethiopian government for the humanitarian truce in the event that the right circumstances arise for the people of Tigray to receive the level of humanitarian assistance required to address the needs on the ground within a reasonable time frame. What did you mean by that?
Well, what we meant by that is that we are ready to honor the cessation of hostilities as long as it is going to be in the best interest of our people. Our people are starving, not because they failed to produce, but rather because there has been a concerted effort, a systematic campaign on the part of the government and its accomplices to impose a siege on our people. So we are currently facing a near catastrophic situation where thousands of tens of thousands of people are in the brink of starvation today. So as long as the cessation of hostilities agreement is going to create a conducive environment for our people to have access to, unfettered access to humanitarian aid, which the international community has been in the forefront of organizing for quite some time now, and then would be more than willing to extend our support and our willingness to honor a cessation of hostility. But it's not going to be, we don't expect it to be a simple publicity exercise or an attempt to hoodwink the international community into believing that there is a readiness on the part of the government to allow for unfettered humanitarian access. The reason why we are saying this has to be done within a reasonable time frame is simply a function of the fact that if such humanitarian access, unfettered humanitarian access is not allowed within a reasonable time frame, the kind of famine situation that our people are facing has reached a point where it has now become untenable for us to wait more weeks or months. So essentially what we are saying is this is a life and death issue, and then we expect the international community to get its access together and to bring its pressure to bear on the government in Addis Ababa to keep its end of the agreement. So as long as our people's needs are going to be met, we're not going to put conditions. We'll be extending whatever amount of cooperation is required of us. That's pretty much what the statement was about.
Have you or your government learned of any improved access for humanitarian aid since the call for a humanitarian truce by Abiy Ahmed's government on Thursday?
None that we know of. I know there has been a flurry of media reports that they have further strengthened their effort to allow for humanitarian access to Tigray. But nothing of the sort has happened so far. We closely monitor the situation. We closely engage our partners, international partners, including members of the diplomatic community who have been actively involved in trying to bring pressure to bear on the government in Addis Ababa. We still expect the international community to really be serious especially this is not a question of a dozen or 10,000 or whatever, no matter what its number. It's not about trucks. It's about ensuring unfettered access, humanitarian access to the people of Tigray, to the needy. And if indications the last 5 days are any guide, there appears to be little in the way of progress. But we also expect the international community to put pressure on the government in Addis Ababa to honor its promise. And of course we also call on the government to stop prevaricating and to stop making specious allegations here and there, and to drag its feet when it comes to allowing for a safe passage of humanitarian trucks, humanitarian access to Tigray. So the simple answer is there has not been any progress, but we continue to call upon both the government in Addis Ababa and our international partners and members of the international community to continue to put pressure on the government. So the idea of unfettered humanitarian access could soon be realized.
Okay. Yilqal Kafala, a president of the Amhara region, said in his address to a regional state council that regional forces were working with cooperation with the Ethiopian National Defense Force to eliminate the Tigrayan government as a threat, and said that the ENDF were expanding recruitment and undertaking general reform for a war on Tigray. Do you have any reason to believe that the Ethiopian government will follow through with its commitment with the humanitarian truce?
Well, we just hope that they will follow through their commitment to the so-called humanitarian truce. Whether Yilqal is going to remain content with such an arrangement is an entirely different matter. We know for a fact the whole idea of negotiations is anathema to the Amhara expansionists and their Eritrean underwriters. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do everything within their power to sabotage any meaningful rapprochement or any meaningful negotiations process between the government in Addis Ababa and the government of Tigray, because essentially they cannot, I don't think they will rest until they make sure that what they consider to be their mortal threat, the people of Tigray and the government of Tigray, are eliminated from the face of the earth. But the fact that we're not eliminated from the face of the earth has nothing to do with lack of such intention on their part. It has everything to do with the people of Tigray's resilience and their determination to fight it out in the face of injustice, in the face of systematic campaign. Of course, we have found ourselves at the receiving end of their genocidal campaigns, and we have no reason to believe that this is going to change anytime soon. It's not for lack of intention that we are surviving. It is simply because our people fought tenaciously and will continue to fight tenaciously, no matter what the intentions, the evil designs of these expansionists and their underwriters are. So it's our hope and expectation that the government in Addis Ababa will realize once again it is not going to be in its best interest to continue to push for military solution for this problem, because if it did work the first time around, there is no reason why it's going to work this time around. As far as we're concerned, I have to reiterate again and again that the reason why the people of Tigray have not been wiped off the face of the earth has nothing to do with lack of intention to do so by the likes of Yilqal or his brothers in crime in Asmara or in Addis Ababa. It has everything to do with the resolve and determination of the people of Tigray to fight another day. And I have every reason to believe that that determination and resolve is still there, and of course will overcome whatever odds.
You recently published an article on foreign policy, and you led it on that you were disappointed by the international community's rather weak response to the humanitarian catastrophe in Tigray, especially in light of the more robust response we've seen to the crisis in Ukraine. Do you think there's still time for the international community to fulfill its obligation to the people of Tigray?
Well, you see, many international civil servants, especially those who are involved in humanitarian operations, have been on record saying that this rather sluggish response toward the humanitarian crisis in Tigray is a stain in their conscience. This is something every Westerner, every Western official would say in public and should say in public. It exactly is a stain in their conscience. It's a stain in our conscience. To allow a government to continue to exterminate its own people, to use hunger as a weapon, it should remain a stain in their conscience. We can understand why the focus on Ukraine is much more lopsided compared to the focus on Tigray. We can understand. Yes, Ukraine deserves all the attention it is getting, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the international community should abandon other hotspots such as Tigray altogether. Still, as I say, it's better late than never, and the international community can still do by way of bringing its pressure to bear on the government in Addis or its partners in Asmara to allow for unfettered humanitarian access. I think it behooves the international community to once again dispense with this sometimes nonsensical discussion about how many trucks will make it to Tigray. It's not a question of 20 trucks, it's not a question of 1,000 trucks. It is a question of ensuring unfettered access to humanitarian aid to the needy, whether they are in Tigray or in Amhara or in Afar. That I don't think is particularly relevant. What matters is that there are millions of people who are in need, and the international community should not feel content with empty promises of delivery of aid, or when in actual fact nothing has materialized. But still, with the right mix of carrots and sticks, the international community, along with countries like the United States, should be and are in a position to bring about change in this regard. Because ultimately, even the government in Addis Ababa and its partners, we would want to do business with the rest of the world, and there are objective reasons why they should somehow be prodded into reason, except that not sufficient amount of prodding has been applied so far. So we expect the international community to get its actors together and to do whatever it takes to bring its pressure to bear on the decisions of people in Addis Ababa or in Asmara or in Amhara or in Afar. But the most important issue at this point is for the central government in Addis Ababa to honor whatever promise it has made, to keep its end of the promise, and no amount of excuses is going to exculpate it from responsibility. That's what I can say.
Getachew Radda, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
For the past 17 months of the conflict, the Ethiopian government had refused to establish a humanitarian corridor, or really any means through which humanitarian aid could reach Tigray. It deviated from this course this past week when it declared a humanitarian truce to reportedly ensure the delivery of much-needed aid into the region. We spoke to residents of Maqala who say they remain cautiously optimistic on the humanitarian truce and said they hope to see it implemented to address the humanitarian crisis on the ground.
نكأتي مدحانيت نكأتي زحمم كحكمنا زرهاب طميت كوغدنا مغبي مدحانتي نخنأتي لكأتي بتعقست نصبلنا اذا تخصطو بيلخا كل ነገር نكأتي ኣብ ተግባር ንኽውዕል ትምኒት ዓብይ ተስፋ ነይና ስለዚህ ለአናስ የድሊና እዩ መድሓኒቲ ምግቢ ከኣትየልና እንደሊ
ተخصطو ማለት በጣም ጽብቕ እዩ ኣማን ዓዲ ኣማን ቦታ ተخصي መፍትሕ ኮይኑ ይፈልጥ ጥራሕ ናይ መጨረሻ መማረጽ ይኾን ዝኽእል
አይሲስፋየር ጉዳይ በጣም ዝድገፍን ቦታውን እዩ ናይ መንግስትና ቁጽ ያቋኑን ይድግፈ የኸም ግለሰብ ከቢድ እዩ ብዝለና የኹነታት ብዝዘሎ ህዝብና ረኺቦ ዘሎ መከራ ችግርን ምግቢ የብልኻ መድሓኒት የብልኻ ምንዋር ማለት ከቢድ ምዃኑ ይፍልጥ እዩ መዓልታዊ ብክንደይ ሸሓት ዝኣክል ህዝቢ ዝሃልቀና ዘሎ
ማንም ህዝቢ ማዕረይና ምስ ማንም ሃገራት ማዕረይና ዝፅሓናት ዓለም እዚኣ ስለዚ ዘን ዓለማት እውን ናይ ዓለም እጃም ክዋፃእኒ እውን ማለት እዩ ከመይ ይበል ኣኩናት እንዳሃለያ ሕዚ ንዓሪኮን ሓቂ እኽላት ተለይ ስለዚ ትግራይን እኽሊ ካኣቱ ኣለዎ እኽሊ እኮ ናይ ተኽስም ጠጥማን ዘይማልን እኮ ሽሩ በሓጢር እኮ ናይ እኽሊ ሙታውን ዘይሙታውን ጉዳይ እኮ ኣይኾነን ነንወይንም ክልቲዮምስ በቦይንቶም እንትኸዱ
ፍትሒ ክራከብ እንድሕር ኮይና ናይ ዓለም ህዝቢ ብደንቢ ከስተውዕለና ኣለዎ ናይ ንኩሬን እኮ ወርሒ ዘይመልአ ጦርነት እኮ ክንደይ ከም ዝዘራረብሉ ዘለዉ ንሪኦ ኣለና ግን ናህና ግን ንምንታይ ዘይዝርወሉ ንሕና ንሳቐለና ህፃውንትና ናብ ልመና ወፅዮም ትምህርቲ ዝኸዱ ዝነበሩ ህፃውንቲ ኣሕዋትና ኣዴታትና ምሕረሲ ሲኢነን መድሓኒት ሲኢነን ጓንቲ መዋለዲ ሲኢኖም ደኳትርና ክነውዑ ይውዕሉ ኣለዉ ስለዚ ማሕበረሰብ ዓለም እዚ ኣትኩረት ክገብረልና ብትሕትና ኢና ንሓስብ
Bloomberg reported yesterday that the Ethiopian National Defense Forces are amassing in their hundreds to the border between Tigray and Amhara regions. The report said it was yet to be clear if the buses load of soldiers were traveling to the borders to replace the personnel who were being rotated to facilitate a humanitarian corridor or if it signals a possible attack on Tigray. In a recent address to newly elected members of the Amhara State Council, Amhara Regional President had said that the Ethiopia's National Defense Forces were preparing a hostile advance on Tigray. This comes in light of Abiy Ahmed's government declaring a humanitarian truce to secure unfettered humanitarian access into Tigray. There are currently over 6.5 million people in Tigray in dire need of humanitarian assistance. According to a joint report issued by the Bureau of Agriculture, Tigray's University Scholars Association and Magala University today, Tigray produced just 33% of estimated production for 2021. The report said this was due to a large-scale destruction of agricultural infrastructures and products by Ethiopian and Eritrean forces. Abel Tsagabu reports.
According to a joint report issued by Bureau of Agriculture, Tigray University Scholars Association and Magala University today, Tigray produced just 33% of estimated produce for 2021. Just two zones, the southern zone and northwestern zones, were able to produce even half of the expected production, while the central and eastern zones were the most highly affected and produced less than 40%.
Generally, the Mahar crop production was below normal, most of the Warada, as compared with the annual plan. The total crop production from the zone of Tigray was estimated like 8.9, and the plan was like 27 millions, which is 30% only. Actually, 1.3 hectare was planted. So the total annual production violation from 6 zones of Tigray was clearly indicated. Among the zone, eastern and central zones are the most affected zones. Of course, all of them are affected, but relatively speaking, eastern and centrals are much affected. No production from the western zone due to the war.
The report said this was mainly due to targeted attack on the region's agriculture sector that included the looting and destruction of agriculture to slaughter of livestock and destruction of essential infrastructures.
Yeah, majority of the crop protection equipment, chemicals, and protection devices, all of them are looted. Even more than 744 irrigation pumps are already loaded. Report coming from the field has indicated that many farms and rural areas have been destroyed, crop burned down or looted, farm equipment and livestock were looted and slaughtered. Like 267 state nursery sites, which has a capacity to produce 200 million seedlings, are completely or almost distracted. So most of his store and infrastructure of the nurseries have been demolished.
The experts say that this level of destruction on Tigray's agriculture infrastructure has led to a higher dependency on emergency food aid, with more than 6.5 million people in dire need of food aid.
About 2 million population has been displaced, and a considerable part of the region's socially and physical infrastructure were destroyed. And the war aggravated further to the deterioration of food insecurity and resulted in 6.5 million population to depend on emergency food aid.
The Bureau of Agriculture and its partners have called on the international community to help revive Tigray's agriculture sector, including with the provision of essential tools, fertilizer, as well as urgently needed aid.
We can't continue like this long. The produce we had and the humanitarian assistance we received are depleted. People are suffering and dying every day. Even we reach to the level we can't count timely the days of people because of communication, fuel, and cash. Considering the coming season, we don't have supply of agricultural input. Especially, we don't have supply of fertilizer, chemicals, seed, and medicine vaccine for the livestock. Thousands of livestock are dying by several transboundary diseases. People are dying by animal diseases like rabies. Considering the lack of agricultural input, the coming season makes it tough for the farming community to face the immediate coming, mainly cropping season.
For the past 9 months,
Tigray has been under siege.
And this isn't your usual siege where government blocks all roads coming in and out of a particular city or state.
No, this is the most comprehensive siege of the 21st century.
Everything has been blocked. Food, commercial goods,
urgently needed aid,
medical supplies.
Really,
if you can name it.
the Ethiopian government has blocked it.
And also banks.
The Ethiopian government has blocked banks in Tigray from accessing their customers' information.
So yes, Tigrayans are deliberately being denied access to their savings.
And also, hospitals and pharmacies are running out of all medical supplies.
Hospitals don't have insulin,
anesthetics,
antibiotics, glucose. They don't even have oxygen.
Also, there's no fuel in Tigray.
Not for ambulances.
Not for aid trucks attempting to distribute food to the 5 million people in need.
Not even for hospitals to run their generators with.
The Ethiopian government has repeatedly attacked
the Tigray hydroelectric dam,
the only source of power supply in Tigray,
using drones given to it by the United Arab Emirates,
Iran,
and Turkey.
But imagine, all this is happening and you can't tell anyone about it.
Imagine not being able to hear the voice of your friends and family members.
Imagine you're not able to reach out to the people you love and care for.
It's important to remember that everything you've heard about Tigray has been despite a communication blackout that has lasted as long as the deadly conflict.
The videos of massacres,
the stories of sexual violence,
the cases of malnutrition,
everything has been while under a complete communications blackout.
A complete blackout.
No internet,
no cell services,
no landlines,
nothing.
There's absolutely no way for you to communicate with someone in Tigray.
So you must be asking yourself,
how there's still a television station running from Tigray.
How are we still here?
We have no salary.
Transportation is non-existent.
Airstrikes are almost daily occurrences.
And life overall is unimaginably difficult.
But we still manage to make it to work.
And that's because we believe that if you knew our story, you'd care to act.
We here at Tigray Television want to bring the stories of ordinary Tigrayans to you.
We want you to learn about what's been unfolding in darkness.
And we want to help you imagine what life is like under siege. And we're doing this despite all the obstacles because
we trust you care about humanity.
About the struggles of people you've probably never met.
About us.
And the millions more in dire need of humanitarian assistance.
But also because we never want to hear you say.
You didn't know.
Moving on to the next news, the head for the Office of Prevention for Communicable Diseases in Tigray says there are over 7,000 patients with tuberculosis in Tigray in dire need of medical treatment. The head for the office also said that lack of medication and other essential medical supplies that has made testing for the bacteria impossible will have a devastating impact on the health and well-being of Tigrayans. Winta Kidana reports.
After months of systematic destruction on health facilities across the state, the Ethiopian government has imposed a siege on the region that has depleted almost all medical supplies. The impact on the community has been catastrophic. Children are going without vaccination, pregnant women have limited access to professional care during delivery, and infectious diseases are spreading like wildfire. Head for the Office of Communicable Diseases at Tigray Bureau of Health, Aragawi Gawramedhin says the situation is dire and is putting the lives of thousands in danger, including 7,000 patients of tuberculosis that have not been able to access medication for months.
Looking at the data between June and November, almost 80% of patients have discontinued their treatment. Right now, TB patients have absolutely no access to medication, and we are no longer able to test for the bacteria. Not only are the patients suffering, the disease is also spreading rapidly.
But the head says this is just the beginning. If medication is not able to reach those in need, communicable diseases like tuberculosis are likely to spread and cause immeasurable harm.
If the patients stop their medication, we are afraid that the bacteria will develop resistance against the drug and make it even harder to cure. We are really very concerned about the impact this may have on the community in the coming 2 to 3 years.
The head for the office also said that the blockade on food items that has led to a man-made humanitarian catastrophe is also likely to reduce the immunity system of the Tigrayan population in general, not to mention the impacts of a large IDP community in Tigray.
It is said that 1/3 of people that contract the disease will also likely hold the bacteria in their lungs. When their immunity gets weaker due to lack of food and other reasons, the bacteria is likely to easily develop into disease. In addition to that, IDPs are living in small spaces that don't have any ventilation. If there is even one person infected, he or she can infect 15 others.
The head reminds that international institutions provided medication and medical supplies for TB, malaria, and HIV for free. But since the start of the siege, no medication has reached Tigray. He calls on the international community to take urgent action.
It has been more than 17 months now, and the international community are not responding to the situation. Patients affected by TB are suffering, dying due to lack of medication. The international community should take decisive action, and soon.
A report from the World Health Organization indicates that close to 4 million people in Tigray are going without much-needed medical attention.
Tigray is home to over 2 million internally displaced persons, many of whom fled their homes after witnessing brutal violence committed on innocent civilians. Our reporter Salome Tigrai visited an IDP shelter in Magala, where she spoke to IDPs from Zalambesa, who shared harrowing stories with her of their journey from northeastern town.
Arbitrary and mass killing of innocent civilians, the use of extreme sexual violence as a weapon of war, and indiscriminate shelling of civilian installations are among the key features that characterize the 8 months-long occupation of Tigray by Ethiopian and Eritrean forces. Following this and many other atrocities, thousands have fled to neighboring Sudan, while millions were internally displaced. We visited an IDP camp in Adshimduhan Magala and spoke with IDPs displaced from Zalambesa, a town located on the border between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Froini was living in Zalambesa, but when the war started, she fled to her hometown of Adwa. She says she came to Adwa in hope of finding relative instability, but found that the situation was equally dangerous.
Let me tell you what happened to me this one day. I was 6 months pregnant then. I ran into a soldier. He asked me where I was headed. I told him that I was going to get my hair done. He told me to come with him. I said I will, and hid in a coffee shop. And he found out I was there, so I went out and hid in a pharmacy. I finally got home. The soldiers would rape anyone. They would even rape pregnant women.
Froini says she came to Magala 3 months ago when her and her daughter ran out of food.
I stayed in Adwa, but there was nothing me and my daughter could eat, so I came to Ma'ala 3 months ago, hoping to find something to eat.
Hadas was also a resident of Zalambasa. She says her and her son depended on his photo studio and her business selling eggs to live a moderately comfortable and happy life. That is until Eritrean forces invaded Zalambasa in mid-November of 2020.
On November 13, 2020, Eritrean forces invaded our area. Many died that day. They went house to house killing people, but we were able to escape and make it to Magala. We're yet to go back home. We left everything we own there. People walked all the way from Zalambasa to Adigrat. The Eritreans followed and killed anyone they found on the way. We made it out alive, but many were killed and robbed of their belongings.
The 9-month-long siege imposed on Tigray by Abiy Ahmed's government has especially devastated IDPs that predominantly depended on host communities and aid to fulfill basic needs.
There's nothing to eat or drink. In the early days, people from Magala used to bring us food and other things, but now there is nothing. We are starving. I've been sick for a week and I had nothing to eat the entire day. Our health is deteriorating.
We are in a terrible situation. There's nowhere to sleep. I had to beg people for mattresses. My child doesn't have anything to eat. There are no blankets, and my child gets so cold.
According to the United Nations, Tigray is home to over 2 million internally displaced persons that have no means by which they can attain basics such as food and medical care.
The use of rape as a weapon has been a gruesome but prevalent feature of the ongoing conflict, with thousands of women and girls said to have been raped by Ethiopian forces and their allies from Eritrea since the start of the conflict on November of 2020. Equally devastating has been the fact that survivors, despite having gone through a traumatic physical as well as emotional experience, many are not able to receive proper care. Miriam Imana has more.
The use of sexual violence as a weapon of war has been one of the devastating features of the ongoing conflict, with thousands of women and girls reported to have been gang raped, abused, and held in sexual slavery. We spoke to one survivor from Gujet in southeastern Tigray. She says she was raped by an Eritrean soldier that threatened to return and inflict the same pain again.
أتيني أي أتيني كله أتيني أجكر الأهل أبو طب الحين جوازي أبو أتيني أبو ذاك الروضي أي جزء بسيم لي كيت الناقري كيت بريدو الفراري هو أرشنا أترانيرو يقول أوصل بالنار تترى هاي العيد الكت هرول أرشنا أتران عدو ماتي هرول
Another survivor says the soldier came into her home with a knife and threatened to kill her if she resisted. The survivors say that in addition to psychological and physical trauma they've undergone, the siege has meant that they're not able to receive the necessary care or fulfill basic needs.
The
survivors called on the international community to act and hold the perpetrators accountable. The torment of survivors of sexual violence in Tigray has been exacerbated by lack of access to medical assistance. A true process of healing for survivors of sexual violence requires access to essential health care needs, including termination of pregnancy, treatment for HIV and hepatitis B, as well as other physical traumas caused due to the violence, and support for depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress impossible as the Ethiopian government continues to impose a siege that has depleted medical supplies, that has taken millions into the brink.
Helen and Berha Fitui were residents of Qorarit in western Tigray when conflict broke out on November of 2020. They said they had gone to work Suddenly they saw local residents running in search of shelter. They've been separated from their parents ever since, but are hopeful they'll be able to once again reunite their family and find their way back home. Our reporter Fanuel Imro has more.
Helen and Berhaftui were residents of Qorarit in western Tigray when conflict broke out in November of 2020. They said they had gone out to do some work when suddenly they saw local residents running in search of shelter.
We were with the goats when we saw people running in doves. We started running when we saw them and left our home behind.
As we went out to the wilderness, we heard guns being fired, so we just continued running along with other people.
For 18 months now, these two siblings have been going town to town in search of their parents, hoping that they can one day reunite their family.